This has been haunting me for years. Maybe sharing it will help me find some peace or, at the very least, help me make sense of it. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest. One of those places where everyone knows each other and nothing much ever happens. It was a quiet, safe place to grow up. Or so I thought. My family lived in a modest, two-story house on the edge of town, right next to a dense patch of woods. I was about 8 years old when it happened. It started one warm summer night. I woke up to a noise outside my window. It was a faint rustling sound, like someone walking through leaves. My room was on the second floor, and my bed was right next to the window. I remember feeling a chill run down my spine as I listened to the noise, trying to convince myself it was just the wind. Curiosity got the better of me, and I slowly pulled back the curtain. At first, I couldn't see anything. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the backyard. Then, I saw it, a tall figure standing in the shadows, just beyond the tree line. It was too dark to make out any details, but I could tell it was watching my house. I stared at the figure for what felt like hours, unable to move or look away. Finally, I mustered up the courage to call for my parents. My dad came into my room, groggy and annoyed, and I pointed out the window. But by then, the figure was gone. He told me it was probably just an animal or my imagination playing tricks on me. He tucked me back into bed and told me to go back to sleep. But I couldn't sleep. I lay there, staring at the window, waiting for the figure to return. And it did. Every night, at the same time, the figure would appear in the same spot, watching my house. I tried to tell my parents again, but they dismissed it as a child's overactive imagination. My mom even suggested that I stop reading so many scary stories before bed. I started to dread nighttime. I would stay awake for as long as I could, hoping that if I didn't look out the window, the figure wouldn't be there. But it always was. Standing there, motionless, watching. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was waiting for something, or someone. This went on for months. Eventually, I got used to it. I stopped telling my parents because I knew they wouldn't believe me. I even started to think that maybe I was imagining it, like they said. But deep down, I knew it was real. Years passed, and I grew up. The memories of that summer faded, buried under school, friends, and the normal struggles of growing up. I moved away for college and didn't think about the figure for a long time. But every now and then, something would trigger a memory, and I would feel that same chill run down my spine. It wasn't until I was 29, visiting my childhood home for the first time in years, that everything came rushing back. My parents had decided to sell the house, and I went back to help them pack up. It was strange being back in my old room, with the same bed next to the same window. I couldn't resist looking out, half expecting to see the figure standing there. One evening, while going through some old boxes in the attic, I found a stack of newspapers. They were all from around the time I was a kid. I started flipping through them, feeling a wave of nostalgia. But then, one headline caught my eye. Local man arrested for kidnapping children. My heart skipped a beat. I read the article, and my blood ran cold. The man in the article had been stalking and kidnapping children in the area for years before he was finally caught. His victims were all around my age, taken from their homes in the dead of night. The description of the man sent shivers down my spine. Tall, gaunt, always wearing dark clothes. There was even a photo of him, taken after his arrest. I stared at the grainy black and white image, and my stomach turned. It was him. The figure I had seen outside my window all those years ago. I felt a rush of emotions. Fear, anger, confusion. How could this be? My parents had never mentioned anything about a kidnapper in our town. I ran downstairs and showed them the article. They were just as shocked as I was. They remembered the man, but had no idea he had been stalking our neighborhood. They thought he had been caught before he could do any harm. But I knew the truth. I had seen him, night after night, watching our house. Watching me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped becoming one of his victims. I didn't sleep much that night. The memories I had tried so hard to forget came flooding back. The figure in the shadows, the rustling outside my window, the feeling of being watched. I realized that I had spent years convincing myself it wasn't real, but it was. It had been real all along. The next day, I went back to the attic and looked through the rest of the newspapers. I found more articles about the kidnapper, detailing his crimes and eventual capture. He had been caught in a neighboring town, trying to abduct another child. The police had found evidence linking him to the disappearances of several children, but not all of them. Some were never found. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled over me. The figure I had seen was real, and he had been watching me. But why? And why hadn't he taken me? I didn't have any answers, and I wasn't sure I ever would. We finished packing up the house, and my parents moved to a smaller place in town. I went back to my apartment, but things were different now. I felt like I was constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the figure to reappear. I started having nightmares about that summer, about the man in the shadows. I knew I needed to do something, to find some closure. I started researching the man, trying to find out more about him and his crimes. I learned that his name was Richard Grayson, and he had lived in our town for years before anyone suspected him of anything. He was known as a quiet, unassuming man who kept to himself. But there were whispers, rumors about him that had circulated for years. Some people claimed to have seen him lurking around children's playgrounds or peering into windows at night. But no one had ever been able to prove anything until it was too late. I visited the town library and went through old records, trying to piece together his story. The more I learned, the more unsettled I became. Grayson had been a loner, with no family or close friends. He had a small house on the outskirts of town, not far from where we lived. I decided to visit his house, hoping it would give me some answers. The place was abandoned, falling apart from years of neglect. As I walked through the overgrown yard, I felt a sense of unease, like I was being watched. I pushed open the creaky front door and stepped inside. The house was dark and musty, filled with old furniture and dusty cobwebs. I walked through the rooms, trying to imagine what it must have been like when Grayson lived there. In one corner of the living room, I found a pile of old newspapers, similar to the ones I had found in our attic. They were all about the disappearances, the same articles I had read before. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that Grayson had been following the stories of his own crimes, collecting them like trophies. I continued to explore the house, feeling a growing sense of dread. In one of the back rooms, I found a small, makeshift bedroom. The bed was unmade, and there were children's toys scattered on the floor. My heart raced as I realized what I was seeing. This was where he had kept his victims. I felt sick to my stomach as I imagined the terror those children must have felt. I knew I needed to leave, but something compelled me to keep searching. In the corner of the room, I found a small box filled with photographs. I hesitated before opening it, knowing that whatever I found inside would haunt me forever. But I had to know. I lifted the lid and looked inside. The photos were of children, all of them around my age, taken in various locations around town. I flipped through them, my hands shaking. Then I saw it, a photo of me, taken from outside my bedroom window. I was sleeping, completely unaware that I was being watched. I dropped the box and stumbled back, feeling a wave of nausea. It was real. He had been watching me, just like he had watched all those other children. I fled the house, desperate to get away from the memories it held. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. I knew I needed to talk to someone, to share what I had found. I went to the police and told them everything, showed them the photos. They were shocked, but there wasn't much they could do. Grayson had died in prison years ago. Taking his secrets with him, I left the police station feeling a mix of relief and frustration. I had found some answers, but not all of them. I knew I would never fully understand why Grayson had done what he did, or why he had watched me for so long without taking me. But I had to try to move on, to live my life without the shadow of those memories hanging over me. It's been a few years since I found those photos, and I still think about that summer sometimes. I still have nightmares, and I still feel like I'm being watched. But I've learned to live with it, to accept that some questions will never be answered. I don't know if sharing my story will help anyone, but I hope it does. Maybe it will make someone feel less alone, or maybe it will help someone understand what I went through. All I know is that I needed to get it out, to finally put those memories to rest.